Hi, my name is Jonathan Robison. I'm a JTech Class 27. Today we're going to go over the components, power flow, and common faults and complaints about manual transmissions. Let's go over some of the components of a manual transmission. You have the input shaft, which has the input bearing and the input gear. You have a counter shaft, which has the counter gear. You have a synchronizer system, multiple of them. Within these systems, you have a synchronizer sleeve, which shifts back and forth between different selected gears. You have blocker rings, and beneath this sleeve is a synchronizer hub. The synchronizer hub is splined directly to the output shaft, which I'll explain how power flow works in a minute and why that's important. The actual gears themselves are not splined to the output shaft at all. They can freely turn until they are selected by using the synchro systems. So you have blocker rings, you have different shafts. Like down here you'll have an idler shaft. Down here you'll have the idler shaft, which helps with the reverse, and I'll explain that again in power flow. Other than that, those are pretty much the parts of a manual transmission. Next is power flow. So when power comes from the engine, imagine the engine's over here somewhere. It comes through flywheel. The flywheel is bolted to the crankshaft on inside the engine, which is actually providing the torque. The flywheel has a clutch system that is bolted onto it, which includes a pressure plate and a friction disc. After power flows through the clutch, it goes here to the input shaft and to the input gear. So let's say you're in first gear. First gear is right here. So this synchro sleeve, if I can get it, there we go. Did it nice and easy for me this time. Let's say you have first gear selected. Power is going to come from the engine through the input shaft to the input gear, down to the counter gear. Power then gets transferred through the counter shaft, which is also called the cluster shaft, all the way through to the selected drive gear. This is the drive gear for the first gear. This is the driven gear for the first gear. So power comes all the way through the engine, through the input gear, down to the counter gear, all the way to the first driven gear, up through to first driven. Then power is sent through the synchronizer system, which is splined to the output shaft. The way it does this is you have dog teeth on your selected drive gear or driven gear. You have a blocker ring, and what the blocker ring does is it helps match the speeds of the gears, because this gear is going to be turning at a different speed than the output shaft will be. So in order to match that, everything's got to slow down. The system's got to slow down, allowing these two things to engage. So put it back into gear if it'll allow me. Okay, so it won't. So let's pretend that this is selected and this sleeve is shifted over. Power goes through the sleeve into the hub, which you saw earlier, which is that silver spot for that silver thing. The hub is splined to the output shaft, so all the power goes through the hub to the output shaft and out back through the drive shaft towards the rear wheels of the vehicle, the differential, and then to the rear wheels. Common complaints / malfunctions of a manual transmission. Customer could state it's grinding when going into gears. Let's say, oh, it's grinding while going into second gear. So you have your first, second sync here. You would want to look at these teeth right here in the blocker ring and the dog teeth of the actual second driven. Let's say the teeth are kind of rounded off, like these guys are. These guys are pretty well done in for. But let's say you have the teeth have been rounded off. That could cause the dog teeth to not line up properly when going in and cause a rubbing or grinding sound. You could also have a dragging clutch, which would essentially stop power flow through the transmission by keeping the clutch engaged or disengaged rather. it would keep it disengaged rather than allowing power to go through to the rear wheels. Power would still be stopped at the clutch system.